Hello, America, and welcome to this Just the News, Real America's Voice special report, the new foundation for American greatness. Today, we're in Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, at the Heritage Action for America Sentinel program, where hundreds of grassroots activists are here rearming for the battles of 2023 and 2024. And the question that lies before them, the question we're going to address on this show tonight is, what will it take to return America to its great state? What are the issues? What are the tactics? What are the policies that get America back on its feet, whether it's energy, education, border, or international security? We've got a great lineup for you, starting with the Oklahoma Governor, Kevin Stitt, people who've been through the transgender movement, people who are on the front lines of education. At every step, we're going to cover the policies that we know are at the heart of the 2022 election and are going to carry over in overtime to 2023 and 2024. We're really looking forward to the great discussion. And as you know, we're lucky to have this incredible partnership with Heritage Action for America. They make this special possible. They make these conversations possible every month. And there's no better way to start off than with the great governor of the state of Oklahoma, Governor Kevin Stitt.
Oh man, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be with you.
Congratulations first on a big election victory.
It was fun. Tuesday night was great. You know, some of the polls and the fake media were saying it was going to be close, and she was even going to beat me. And we won by more than we did 4 years ago. So we won by over 14 points. And so just so happy that the truth prevailed, because there was a lot of negative ads run against me from some of the special interests. And it was a great night.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's a good time for the Oklahoma people now, because this experiment that you've created of taking conservative ideas, putting them into policy, it's working. You fought ESG. But I want to start with one that I know in your second term you're really committed to: education reform, empowering parents, school choice. Tell us where you're headed with that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first off, you know, not every kid learns the same way, right? And we shouldn't just have, I believe that every kid, regardless of their zip code or where they live or their race or their heritage, they should have the absolute opportunity for the best education possible.
Sure.
School choice should not be just for the rich. And so that's why I'm fighting so hard for scholarships and to allow more charter schools and more private schools and maybe home schools. And you know, one example, we just set up an aviation program in Norman, a new high school. So now, if you want to become a pilot, or if you want to become an A&P mechanic, you can now come to this high school, and by the time you graduate, you've got your pilot's license and you're on your way to that type of a career. So I tell people we need more doctors, lawyers, engineers, but we also need more A&P mechanics and more pilots, and we need more heat and air and plumbers. And so we have to kind of think outside the box and really align our education system with the workforce, with the workforce needs, with the companies. What are the jobs of tomorrow? And I just think that the education system will not fix itself from within. We need to empower parents to make the best decision for their kids.
The pandemic really helped on that front. It's amazing to watch the Papa and Mama Bears that are now active in their kids' educations, active in politics. When you go out and talk to them, you just got done with the campaign, you're out with people every day. What are the most important things that parents are looking for right now?
You know, I think it's exactly like that. What you said is, you know, parents want more of a say in their kids' education. Our parents are more active than they've ever been, because during Zoom and during some of the things that were happening nationally, you were seeing what was being taught. We saw some of the nasty books that are in some libraries. And parents, we want to put them in charge of their education system. And so I think that's super important. I tell people, regardless of where you're at on the political spectrum, you all want the best education for your kids. But instead, we're listening to these big labor unions that are trying to protect and protect their little entity instead of putting parents in charge. We're the taxpayers. We should have education freedom.
Forgot who their customer is.
That's exactly right. They're trying to protect their little kingdom, which is so disappointing. They're actually supposed to be focused on the kids, and they've lost their way. And now they would rather lock things down. And I had one district that was closed for 355 days.
Unreal.
I hammered them every day.
Yep.
And if anybody was governor and they had to talk to the single moms that would call you and they would say, "Governor, I have to go to work and my first grader is not learning how to read on Zoom," it would break your heart, because my kids were in school the whole time.
Right.
And so that's why I fought so hard. But the hypocrisy of the left, those folks, you know, the other governors in other states that are shutting their schools down and their superintendents of education, their kids are in private schools the whole time, where they're saying, "Oh, it's not safe here." It's ridiculous.
It is. It's incredible. You're blessed to oversee a state that has some of the greatest energy resources in the world. We are suffering from inflation and an energy crisis. Diesel fuel, something that used to always be abundant, now in shortage. What do states need to do to pressure this Biden administration to unleash the fury?
You know, I mean, the American people have got to stand up and just say, we got to have some common sense. I mean, every president of the United States since 1973 has had an energy independence policy. Let's meet the needs of our citizens with our own resources. Until this administration, and they've taken a left turn and they canceled the Keystone Pipeline. They are passing laws to tax the oil and gas industry. They're trying to put their finger on the scale, their thumb on the scale, and drive away, oil and gas. Yeah. That's really what's happening. But demand is the same. And what I try to explain to this administration is, if demand is the same and you choke off supply, prices are going to go up.
There's only one outcome.
There's only one outcome, and we're seeing that at the grocery store and at the gas pump. And the regulation is hurting the diesel stuff. Their solution is to buy oil from Russia and OPEC and maybe release it from the strategic stockpile, which makes no common sense at all. So we have to stand up. And that's back to the federalism. And the states like Oklahoma, we're producing and we're doing our part. But we're also number 2 in wind energy production. I remind people that we need more of everything. I'm fine with wind, and I signed an MOU with the governor of Louisiana and Arkansas to actually bring a hydrogen hub to Oklahoma.
Really?
To our 3 states. And so we're leaning into hydrogen. We've got wind energy. Obviously, we're number 4 in oil production, number 3 in natural gas. We've got some of the cleanest water, cleanest air in the country. And the U.S. needs to be energy independent. That's just plain and simple.
Yeah, it's a national security issue and a pocketbook issue. It's so remarkable. You've pursued the all-above energy policy. Nuclear energy, for a while, people were putting their foot on that, trying to keep it out. It seems like it's having it, with all the innovation going on in the science and engineering world, come back. It could solve a lot of problems short-term, can it?
Absolutely. I mean, again, more of everything. We want to unleash. We believe in free market principles. And, right now, Europe is dealing with $180 a kilowatt hour, and Oklahoma is less than $9.
Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing. Yeah. And so I'm talking to CEOs, and we're recruiting businesses and manufacturing that are looking for a reliable energy grid. And I think states like Oklahoma that have a reliable energy grid, we're producing more than we consume, is going to be a huge economic driver versus states like California that tried to over-regulate and try to stop new production. And so now they're dealing with rolling blackouts. Right. And I think if states will band together like Oklahoma and Texas and Pennsylvania and oil producing and energy producing states, I think that's a huge advantage for us.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's lessons to be learned in the states. I mean, one of the most amazing parts of the Biden administration, whether through the court system, whether through smart policy, federalism has really gotten revived. The idea that states are supposed to be first, and the best ideas grow from the ground up in the states and then go to Washington. When you look around, you talk to your colleagues that are going to be in Congress, what are some ideas that states are doing that Congress should be jumping on?
Well, like you said, the states are actually, building the buildings, building the roads. And I remind people that, in Oklahoma, we have a $25 billion budget. We get about 40% of our revenue from the federal government. The rest is our state. But they can create policies in Washington, D.C., but it's the states that actually implement it. So we've got 50 different examples of democracy, and they need to look around at which state has the best economy, which state has the best education system. And that's what I challenge my guys is let's bring those best ideas to Oklahoma and let's go pass them and let's be a top 10 state. And that's kind of my vision that I always talk about is top 10 state in everything we do, roads and bridges and tourism and the economy and healthcare and education. And so, but again, yes, the feds, I don't think our founders envisioned the federal government, a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., telling us how to educate our kids, what to teach in our schools. There's no need for it because the state has a Department of Education in Texas. And that's the beauty of the way our founders set it up is, and I readily admit that, hey, every state can do things differently. What we do in Oklahoma, I represent the 4 million Oklahomans. And we're going to be different than California. And that's fine because we got 50 different examples of democracy and it's not a one-size-fits-all. across the country. So we're closer to the people, and that's what we always talk about in Oklahoma. The feds need to continue to not be heavy-handed with dictating what happens as a one-size-fits-all across the country.
Yeah, that doesn't work. We've learned it doesn't work. I got about 30 seconds left. More block grants, less federal agencies. You'd like to see that, right?
100%. Because what happens is when these federal agencies get bigger, they simply try to write policies and they legislate from inside their agencies because of what they think is important. And number one, it's not going through the people, it's not going through Congress, and it definitely needs to belong to the states, right? So we know that that's the right way to lead, that whatever's not specifically designed for the federal government belongs to the states or the people, is what our Constitution says.
Such a novel idea, and it works really well. I know all of America has its eyes on Oklahoma. So many great experiments under your leadership, Governor. What a great honor to have you here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages. Folks, welcome back from the commercial break. We just had this great conversation with Governor Kevin Stitt, and he talked about how important parents are to revolutionizing the American education system, taking it back from the bureaucrats, putting it back in the hands of parents. Our next guest, she's on the front lines of that very big fight. She's the president and founder of the Parents of Defending Education, Nicole Neily. Nicole, great to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
You have been a warrior on the front lines of this. You've empowered parents. You've made changes from school boards nationwide. A lot of energy after the Virginia election with Glenn Youngkin. 2022, some mixed results. What do we make of them, and where do we need to go next?
Yeah, I mean, let's take a step back and realize most of the parents who are active in this fight right now, this is their first rodeo. 3 years ago, they weren't politically active, and that to me is so fascinating. And so you think about the amount of money, the amount of power that has been entrenched in the system for so long. And it's not just the teachers' unions, it's the secondary school principals, the PTA, the National School Board Association, like we saw, all these entities that we thought were on our side, that had our children's best interests at heart, obviously didn't. And so parents are trying to make that up right now. And I feel like the past 18 months has really been, the scales have fallen from people's eyes. They're getting smart about issues, about activism, about how to engage in these issues. And so the fact that, at the local level, actually, there was a tremendous amount of turnover. Lots of school boards flipping, lots of first-time candidates running and winning. School boards, state school boards flipping in Texas.
Right.
In South Carolina, a new great state superintendent of education, Ellen Weaver. And so I think there's a lot of cause for enthusiasm at the local level. And again, our parents are continuing to get smarter, become a little bit more battle hardened. And, the nice thing is they're not going away. I think you and I saw the Tea Party fizzle out, and I have full confidence that this parent movement is not fizzling out, because you think about kitchen table issues. I sit across from my children every single night at the kitchen table, and I see them withering on the vine in their school. And I think, you know what? This is not going to happen. I'm not going to let this happen.
No greater motivation than that to get in the fight. Actually, a lot of the elections occurred in the spring and summer, too. And so when you take the tally for all of 2022, a lot of victories on this front, probably more than in any recent memory that I can think of. Though there's a mindset, I just saw it again with Congressman Eric Swalwell in the last few days saying, if you let parents have a say in education, it's like letting the patient do his own surgery. Not true at all, but how do you stamp that mindset up? Because it's clearly ingrained in a lot of policymakers and certainly in the school bureaucrats.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we think last year with Terry McAuliffe saying parents don't have a role.
Yeah.
A few months ago, the Michigan Democrat Party had that Facebook post up that they had to take down when they said the role of public education is to prepare children to function in society. Who's defining what that is? It's you guys, where you think we see parents being called birthing people, right? It's this general shift away. And then also setting families up in an adversarial relationship against the schools as well as against their children. I mean, one thing we see, particularly in the gender space, is the use of the term safety. Families are not safe. They're not supportive. My children would never, ever think that I was not loving and supportive of them unless someone put that idea in their head. They are intentionally trying to destroy the relationship between parents and children because they think they know better than we do.
You see it in some of the trainings that they've given the teachers out of Missouri and others. There's clearly these little subtle messages designed to drive a wedge between child and parent. It's really remarkable. A lot of victories are there. Critical race series on the front lines. A lot of big victories there. Transgenderism currently being fought out. 2023, 2024, where does this conversation and policy debate go next?
Yeah, last year through our tip line, almost 100% of what we got in was about race. This year, probably 75% is about gender. Title IX, obviously a lot of this is being driven by the federal government. Sure. Where we see things moving and where we hear questions from parents right now are about surveys and data mining of children, getting inside kids' heads. So using kind of this mental health crisis as a reason for more funding. Right? The same people that made our children basket cases by keeping schools shut for 18 months.
Isn't that ironic?
Are the same ones who say, give us more money, we'll fix the problem. You know what, I don't really trust you guys and I don't want you in there. And again, while we're dumping all this money into mental health intervention, who's doing that? It's the counselors. Well, is it a licensed mental health counselor or is it the college counselor that says, are you gonna go to Illinois or Illinois State? These are not trained professionals. And we also see schools that are intentionally withholding information from parents, saying we're going to maintain 2 separate sets of records so your family doesn't know if you're a different gender at home. And so that worries a lot of our parents. What's happening to that information? How will it be used against us in the future? And again, if you're trying to fix my child's mental health, how on earth is telling my child you can be one thing at home and one thing at school? You know, that's how you end up with a mental health issue.
You do. It's the ultimate crisis. Yeah, living in 2 worlds. The courts have been a strong place of victory, obviously school board elections. What will a new Congress potentially lend to this effort to try to balance things back in parents' favor?
Yeah, I think, at the federal level, talking to people up on the Hill, I think they're enthused about some investigations as to, why parents were called domestic terrorists, for example. As well as, let's put forward an agenda that actually empowers parents to know what is going on in their children's education, to be involved. Things like that frankly should not be partisan. The fact that that has become a partisan issue is mind-boggling. We know that children do better when parents are involved in their kids' lives, period. If my children are learning about Germany, I'll make schnitzel for dinner. We'll watch a movie together, right? We want to be supportive. We want to be engaged.
Extend that learning, yeah.
Yeah, and not be held at arm's length, not be talked down to or dismissed. Last year I would get emails from my kids' school once a week. They'd say, oh, we talked about the 60s this week. Well, what part of the 60s? Did you do the Beatles or the Weather Underground? Right. I need more information. Yeah, exactly. I deserve more information. Yeah.
And they treat it like a state secret. It's crazy.
Absolutely, yeah. File a public records request. How dare you do that to us? Yeah.
Well, Nicole, you have won so many battles. You're empowering parents, you're training parents. You can see this massive grassroots army. It's an amazing thing to watch. Being here at the Sentinel program, you get the sense that the grassroots is where the action really is, isn't
Absolutely,
it?
Yeah.
Great honor to have you on the show today. Congratulations on all you achieved. We're going to be watching closely in 2023.
Perfect.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages. Folks, we're down in Fort Worth, Texas, having an extraordinary conversation with everyday Americans. And our next guest has an extraordinary story to tell. His name is Walt, and he's the author of Trans Life Survivor and Articles of Impeachment Against Sex Changes. It's such an honor to have you here today, Walt. You have an amazing story to tell. I think a lot of people haven't heard it. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. Well, it started in 1944, so it was a long time ago. I was a curious kid. My grandmother was a seamstress making women's clothing, and she was babysitting me, and I became very interested in what she was doing. I leaned on the sewing machine as a 4-year-old kid, kind of mesmerized by what Grandma was doing, and showed an interest in, cross-dressing. As a 4-year-old, it was curiosity.
Right.
And as a 4-year-old is curious about everything. And so Grandma decided in her wisdom to make me a purple chiffon dress, perfectly matched to my little body. In 1944, put that dress on me and started affirming me and started telling me how cute I was. And therein lies what we call an adverse childhood experience where you begin to damage a child. This is emotional and psychological abuse. Now, I did not know it was at the time.
It's too little to tell.
It seemed like fun, right? It seemed very benign, but what she was doing was destroying my core identity, the way I saw myself, the way I visualized myself, the way I presented myself. So with that, she decided to keep it a secret for 2.5 years until I became so accustomed to the affirmation of every time I was over there and she would babysit me, I'd be in the purple dress.
Wow.
It was just the way it was.
Yeah.
And so this is the indoctrination that we see going on today. And it's no different today, really. The harm is even greater because there's a lot more people involved in the affirmation process.
That's right.
And now they're giving people hormones and surgery at such a young age. And thankfully, that didn't happen to me at that young age. It happened later. But so, you know, as time went on, my father, after he found out that I was cross-dressing, he became, you know, just horrified about what his mother-in-law had been doing,
right,
if you can imagine. And so he began to, in his own way, try to discipline me with a hardwood floor plank, thinking this was the way to man me up.
Right.
You know, sort of like
Right.
a blacksmith would take hot iron and pound it over something and shape it, and he was going to shape me into a man with a hardwood floor plank. That was his best tool. That's all he knew to do. But that wasn't the end of it. He had an adopted brother who was a teenager at the time, and because I was wearing a purple dress, it became family knowledge. He began to sexually molest me. So this is by the time I'm 9 years old, I've been cross-dressed, affirmed, hit with a hardwood floor plank, and sexually molested. It's not the best way to start life.
I'll say so.
So that set within me these things which we now know, because there's been a lot of research about it, called adverse childhood experiences. And so I didn't know it at the time, but I was going through this pattern, and all of a sudden the news came out in the 50s, Christine Jorgensen headline, "The soldier becomes a female."
Right.
And I thought that was the way I identified. It's like, nobody's talking about this. It's the first thing I'd seen.
That's me.
That's me. That must be what I'm about. So then I began to take in that identity and went through that process. And I was never homosexual. I never had that as an issue. I had this gender confusion that started with a purple dress, hardwood floor plank, and sexual molestation. So I got married. I had children. I was an associate design engineer on the Apollo space missions working on the area of cryogenics. I left that industry and went into the automobile industry and became a top executive for American Auto Motor Company as the national operations manager. But I was struggling with a purple dress, a hardwood floor plank, and sexual molestation had not been dealt with. You know, when we don't deal with things that happen to us, when we have adverse childhood experience, they're going to come back and haunt you at some point.
They carry on, don't they?
And so I had this identity problem all through my life, even during the marriage, and I told her I was struggling. And so while I was with American Honda, I decided that I would go see a gender specialist. And let me just say to anybody listening to this, never go to a gender specialist. They will destroy your life. That's their whole purpose, is to destroy your life. I went to a gender specialist. He said, you have gender dysphoria, and what you need is hormones and surgery. That was in 1981. I went through the protocols in 1982. I got divorced, left my wife. 1983, I had the surgery, and I identified as Laura Jensen, lived that way for 8 years. I started studying psychology at UC Santa Cruz because I'm interested in really getting into what this is about.
Right.
And I realized that people who identify in this way are struggling with either bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, body dysmorphia, depression, some underlying comorbid issue. Nobody's born transgender. In fact, the truth is, this is the truth today, transgenders don't exist. There is no such thing as a transgender. I have a paper here from Superior Court of California, San Mateo, written by the doctor who performed my surgery. He had done 5,000 surgeries.
Wow.
Signed and co-signed by the guy who approved me for surgery, saying the only thing that hormones and surgery is capable of doing to anyone is neutering them.
Wow.
Nobody is altered hormonally to the point to where they change genders. The only thing that hormones do is make you look feminine or for a girl look masculine. So what is the real word that we should be using? The real word is we're feminizing boys or men and masculinizing women. We're not changing anybody's gender. No gender in history has ever changed.
That's right.
So it's
Scientifically
not even
impossible.
It's not even a gender issue. And so I wrote this book, a cheap plug for my book. This tells about the history. of how it got started. And it was started by people who were pedophiles. It wasn't started by people who were trying to help kids. They were started by pedophiles. And then I wrote this book, Trans Life Survivors, that you mentioned.
Right.
This book gives the consequences. These are 30 stories about people whose lives were destroyed.
Talk about the consequences. We only got a few minutes left, but I want to capture the personal consequences to you and the decision when you decide, I'm done with this.
Yeah, well, of course, I lost my career. They threw me out. Income-wise, I've never had a job since October 1983 that I could.
Really?
So I lost over, with my income at the time, if I'd have just gone steady through that, would have been about $2 million in loss. So those are consequences. My kids paid a huge price for my misguided ideas about this whole idea. And of course, I was divorced. Now I'm remarried for 25 years. We started a ministry that reaches around the world called sexchangeregret.com.
Right.
And people can reach out. I've been working with people now for well over 12 years. The first person I helped actually 25 years ago. So we've learned about adverse childhood experiences. They're called ACEs. We realized that there is a thing called generalized dysphoria. People do not have gender dysphoria. That was a made-up term to have this explosion in 2013 when they changed the terminology in the DSM. Generalized dysphoria is real. Gender dysphoria is not.
For parents and children and others going through this, and policymakers, what's the most important message you want them to take from
The
your
most
experience?
important message is to understand that what we've set up here is we have a social contagion that is indoctrinating kids in school. And this is so troubling to me because I have kids writing me at 10 years old who are caught up in these things in school, and I help the parents get out of it. So policymakers need to understand nobody changes genders. We're feminizing boys, masculinizing girls. Stop using the word gender dysphoria. Stop using the word transgender. Stop saying you're transitioning, and stop using the word gender dysphoria, because I haven't found one person that actually has gender dysphoria. I found that they have generalized dysphoria. So I've written about this, many articles, and so I think we need to own the language. We're using the LGBT language, and we're hurting ourselves by using their terminology. We need to stop doing it.
Own the language, own the narrative. It's one of the great lessons in all of history. That's what happens. Walt, what an extraordinary experience. Well, thank you for sharing it and helping us learn a lot more about it. Really, what a great conversation.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Great honor to have you. Folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to the commercial break. We're down in Fort Worth, Texas. I know this is a different set. That's because we're visiting Texas and the Sentinel program, the Heritage Action for America Sentinel program. And I'm blessed to be joined by one of the original Sentinels in the Heritage Action for America program, Ismael Moran. Great to have you here, sir.
Thank you, John.
You have been in this program from the beginning. You've seen the grassroots army grow. How has it changed? We're in 2022. It's bigger, larger, more energetic. What things have you seen?
I think it's more not only larger, but more energetic. I think that you see the passion in the activists and the grassroots movement. And, I think you see it in the elections. I think, we elected our first Republican Congresswoman in over 100 years down in South Texas. In District, Monica De La Cruz. We came close to re-electing Mayra Flores. That won District 34 down there. So I think Cassie Garcia, even though she lost, she ran a very competitive race.
Very tight, yeah.
Yes. So we're making a lot of huge gains.
And when you're a Sentinel, it is a year-long commitment. You're doing things every day. You're knocking on doors. You're talking to people. You're educating them. As you were out this election, what did you pick up from the American electorate? What were the issues that really were at the heart of their concern?
Well, being on the border, obviously, border issues. I think that's something that runs deep, and many of us are passionate about. Of course, the economy. I mean, when you go to the grocery store and you're paying, at least $1 more for a dozen eggs.
Yeah.
And many of the folks down there literally make minimum wage. So, how do you balance your budget?
Yeah, hard choices every day, right?
Right.
Yeah. The two parties have been battling over this issue for a couple of years, inflation, the changes that the Biden administration brought in. Everyday Americans, when they go to that gas tank to fill it or they go to the grocery cart to fill it, what do they want Washingtonians to know? The people that actually control the policy, what do they need to hear from the real people of America?
Well, I think the key thing is to work for the people. In other words, and at the end of the day, it's you're looking at folks that, the majority of the folks down in South Texas, down where I'm from, work for school districts or work for the government, or whether it be state, federal, local. So when you're in jobs that, unlike in the private sector, that you can get a promotion or relocate, they establish a career and establish roots down there. So even if you're a small business owner, you start looking at the challenges with when you raise taxes, when the economy is slowing down. The economy is slowing down. The likelihood that we may go into a deep recession next year.
Yeah.
So then that hurts them, and then that makes it tougher for them to just survive and make their bills and their loans, whatever they may have regarding their businesses, or if they have a mortgage. Look at the mortgage rate. I mean, it's doubled.
It doubled in just a few short months.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. So like a year ago, you get a mortgage at 3%. Now what? It's 6%.
Yeah,
so,
some places 7 even.
yes,
I know, it's
right.
amazing.
So that's challenging.
Yep.
So a lot of these folks that have a variable a loan, all of a sudden now maybe their payment was $400. Now it's $800, $900.
Very important disposable income gone,
Yes.
just like that.
Yes. So when our elected officials go and spend money like they did this last year, it's going to have an impact.
It sure does. Man, they're spending it more still. It's crazy. You've lived almost your entire life on the border. You've seen the change in policy the last 2 years. For all those who live at the border and know what's really going on, what's the most important message you can tell the policymakers in Washington?
Well, that it's uncontrollable. We're being overrun. And unfortunately, a lot of the incidents do not get to report it. It's like I was looking at yesterday, we had in the McAllen, Texas area, two young men, two juveniles that were illegals, ran through a gated community trying to evade the law enforcement. And the challenge is, it's like I always share with a lot of folks, is that let's say we catch one vehicle of drugs, whether it be fentanyl, cocaine, well, how many more crossed?
That's it. Yeah, the gotaways, right?
Yes, right. Yeah. So that's a challenge. And then we look at, I remember when I was growing up, you would have folks cross the border, but it wasn't in the numbers that are crossing today. It's I would say it'd be on tenfold. I don't want to exaggerate, but it's more than that. And primarily back then, the majority would be of Mexican descent.
Right. Now it's every country, right?
Now it's every country. And the other thing that a lot of us are not aware of, because some of us don't live on the border, is these are not just people from Central or South America. These are people from other countries.
Yep. Europe, Middle East, right?
Yes, that's correct. They just simply come across.
Wow. Scary moment.
Yes.
Ismael Moran, you've had an incredible history with the Sentinel program. It's been amazing being here, watching all these grassroots warriors. Honored to have you on the show. Thank you for your service to this program, because it's such an amazing thing to watch all of these grassroots activists making a difference in their country.
Well, thank you, John, for the opportunity to share my experiences.
It's a great honor to have you. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back, everybody. The pro-life movement has so many new, energetic voices and activists changing this country day by day. And one of them, we're lucky, is joining us right now. Seth Gruber from the White Rose Resistance is here with us. Seth, love what you're doing. Everybody's getting excited about what you've been able to do in this country.
Thank you, brother.
What do you see coming out of this election for the pro-life movement?
Yeah, so there's been polling on this already, as you've seen as well, and it does seem that abortion was a top-tier issue for the left that drove them to the polls, which it usually doesn't, right? It's usually things that more directly impact your life, right? Whether that's the safety of your neighborhoods or the gas prices or what's it called now, Bidenflation, right?
Yeah, Bidenflation,
it's
right.
usually those kind of issues. It's not usually abortion, but I think Roe v. Wade getting overturned upset I call it the spirit of the age and his acolytes, just to be clear, but the secular progressive moral revolutionaries, right? For whom abortion is a sacrament. It's a core centerpiece of really the entire secular progressive moral revolution. That goes back to Margaret Sanger. That goes back to Thomas Malthus in the 1800s. This idea of overpopulation, too many people, eugenics, kill the babies, the poor. So this is a long train of ideas. And so I think Roe v. Wade getting overturned was just one move too far for these revolutionaries, and so they lost their freaking mind. And so I think that's kind of what drove them to the polls. But on the opposite side, we kind of saw a lot of governors winning victories who had stood very firm on the issue of life, whether that was DeSantis, Kevin Stitt, that there were several others. I wrote them down here. Brian Kemp, of course, who was very solid on pro-life. Greg Abbott here in Texas. Also Kay Ivey, who didn't go as far enough for some pro-lifers, but was still quite firm on her Human Life Protection Act in 2019. New Hampshire Governor Chris, how do you say it? Sununu. Sununu, I said it right. He only banned abortions after 24 weeks, which is still heinous to allow that many late-term babies to be killed, but won against the Democratic nominee. So a lot of gubernatorial elections were won by conservatives and pro-lifers who had been pretty firm on the pro-life issue. So I think you said earlier, it kind of split both ways. So that was kind of interesting to see. But this culture war, I think, is just getting started on the issue of life with the overturning of Roe.
Where does it go next? I think when you look at Dr. Oz's performance in Pennsylvania, a little bit of waffling there, and it probably hurt him. You see some of the evangelicals don't come out. What is the biggest lesson for conservative and liberal candidates to take from this election about issues of life?
Yeah, well, I think for conservatives, it's to triple down, to hit back twice as hard and to not pull your punches, and to insist on healthy standards. You know, I mean, it doesn't take me to tell you this, brother, but Democrats in the 1960s and 70s would be ultra MAGA Republicans today.
It's true.
They would be smeared by the White House press
actually,
secretary as ultra MAGA, whatever that means, whatever they're trying to do with that one. Because most Democrats in the 60s and 70s were pro-life.
They were.
And so isn't that fascinating?
It is
If they just
fascinating,
jumped in a time machine with Marty McFly and the DeLorean and came out in DC in 2022, they'd be like, why is my party calling me a domestic terrorist just because I'm pro-life? I mean, the FBI has arrested over 11 pro-lifers in the last 6 weeks.
It's crazy, isn't it?
For allegedly violating the freedom of access to clinic entrances. They didn't really at all. It's wicked what's happening. In my opinion, this is Attorney General Merrick Garland's revenge fury war against all the conservatives that kept him from getting a seat on the highest court in the land. Let's all remember that. He's behind these arresting of pro-lifers. And so I think it's very important for us to understand that if we don't get this issue right, we are abandoning the entire culture war. And so this is what I try to say to squishy moderate pro-lifers who they do want abortion legal to a certain point. I want to tell them what Reagan said in his book Abortion and the Conscience of a Nation after he became pro-life and regretted his pro-abortion policies in California. And in that book, he has a compelling short line, and I want to share it with you and your listeners. He says, Abraham Lincoln recognized that we could not survive as a free nation as long as some men could decide that others are not fit to be free and should therefore become slaves. Then Reagan said, likewise, we cannot survive as a free nation today as long as some men can decide that others are not fit to live and should therefore be abandoned to abortion and infanticide. So there is no cause more important than affirming than the transcendent right to life of all human beings, the right without which no other rights have any meanings. So if we were to paraphrase Reagan today, we might say, if you don't get the right to life right, you won't get any other rights right. Right? That's the fundamental right.
He might have said it just that way, too.
It wasn't a coincidence that our founders put the right to life first. That wasn't just a coinkydink. They understood what they were doing. The right to liberty, pursuit of happiness, and property don't mean much. In fact, they mean nothing at all if you can be killed. And so as long as our government continues to deny the natural right to life to an entire class of human beings, our own rights will constantly be endangered by modern jurists and a ruling class whose jurisprudence is completely foreign to the founding fathers.
we're heading into right out of the, well, this election isn't even over yet, but it soon will be over, we hope. We're going to head right into the 2024 election. What is the issues and how does life and abortion play in the next 2 years with so many states going to be taking actions and litigation playing out in the courts? Where do you think it plays in the election?
Well, firstly, I wish Clarence Thomas had gone I wish that the court had gone the Clarence Thomas route and gone the whole way and appealed to the personhood protections of every human being in the Constitution as the legal argument for the overturning of abortion at the federal level. If you are a conservative and you want to live by any mantle of the term conservative, you must support a federal ban on abortion in all 50 states from the moment of conception. If it's a human being, it's a person, and it has a right to life. And so Clarence Thomas was the only justice, unfortunately, that wanted to go the whole way and fully, not just overturn Roe, but fully ban it at the federal level. So we need more people with the jurisprudence of Clarence Thomas. But in the meantime, we fight at the state level. We get the right people elected. And I think we're learning through the DeSantis season that we're living in that that's the future of the GOP. And if it doesn't become the future of the GOP will cease to be a relevant party in this country.
Pretty important words to remember as we head into this. Seth, what a great opportunity to have you here at this amazing event in Texas.
Yes,
and,
thank you.
Thanks for what you do.
Amen.
It's amazing stuff.
You too.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll be wrapping things up just right after this. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to wrap up this conversation today with the executive director of the grassroots army that is Heritage Action for America, Jessica Anderson. It is good to have you here.
Great to be here.
We've been having a conversation about laying a new foundation for American greatness. A lot of people come out of this election thinking, well, maybe we got to hold back our ambitions. We didn't get what we wanted out of the election. You don't agree with that at all, do you?
No, John, I actually think the exact opposite of that, which is the Biden administration thinks that they have a mandate from the American people, and they don't. It would be a mistake to assume he had it after 2020, and he certainly doesn't have it after the results of this last week for the 2022 midterms. Instead, what I believe to be true is that the American people are so fed up with the business as usual on the left and on the right, and they want to see something different. They want to know that there's a real governing agenda that will help their lives, that will put their families first, their kids first, actually allow parents to have control over what their kids are learning, so many more issues. And so when we talk about what new foundation is needed, that's what we mean. We mean real leadership on the real issues and an actual clear governing agenda for where we want America to be over the next 5, 10, 15 years.
There's a great line in the movie Apollo 13, failure is not an option. I think for Republicans, status quo is not an option. What does the grassroots do to make sure that message is relentlessly delivered so they're not tempted to fall back to their natural tendency, which is let's not rock the boat in Washington?
Well, first, I think we have to hold the ground that we've gained. There has been so many incredible strides by the conservative grassroots over the last 18 months at the state level. Look at the election integrity bills that have passed. Look at the pro-life measures that have passed. The anti-ESG, so many great school choice bills. Arizona just signed universal school choice in a way that Arizona never thought they were going to do that a decade ago. And so there is good work that has been going on at the state level. Now we have to do more of that. We have to take that energy, couple it with our frustrations at the federal level, and plow full steam ahead. And I actually think because we've retired Nancy Pelosi now, she's given up her gavel. Yep. Because we've retired her, we're going to serve as the accountability block to Biden. His legislative agenda is effectively over. And that's a good thing. And we have to use that now to get even more gains, put conservatives in leadership positions, on committees, using the power of FOIA and investigations, making the rules package so it works for the American people. I mean, there's a laundry list of things that we need to get done over the next 90 days.
When you look at the agenda and you look at the fact that it's still going to be divided government, it seems like the power of the purse is the big hammer that Republicans can exercise. They can do everything from the border to parents' rights through the budget process. What are the top priorities you want them to use that power for?
That's right, John. The budget is where you put your policy priorities. Plain and simple. I was taught that very early in my career. The budget is where you put your policy priorities. So if Republicans are serious about securing the border, the first thing that they'll do is they'll drop a border security package on day one, and they'll title it H.R. 1. And that will effectively close the border, provide additional resources and funding for the law enforcement to do their job to secure our border. It'll close all the loopholes that the Biden administration has just run roughshod over. And it will tighten up all of the asylum claims and how the asylum process works on the border right now. That security package is critical if we're actually going to be serious and follow through to the American people what all these Republican candidates have promised. They've all said they would secure the border. They need to do that and put that as their number one priority, H.R. 1. And then from there, John, there's a number of issues to tackle. You can look at big tech and the need to put big tech in check. That could look like Section 230 reforms. We've got some great model legislation. That's a start for Congress to get their arms around. On the issue of China, I think you're actually going to see a desire for Republicans, probably for the first time really in over a decade, to get serious about making a China-resistant American economy. And to do that means we're going to have some trade-offs. Things are going to cost more because we're going to buy American. And every single grassroots conservative I talk to says, absolutely, I will pay $2 more for these goods to know that they're not propping up the CCP. So those are three things that Congress can do immediately: the border, big tech, and China.
The most tangible thing people feel from the Biden era more than anything else is inflation, because it affects every part of their life. People are making a choice between filling the grocery cart or the gas tank. What can be done in the short term to alleviate that pressure, start to put the economy back to a more normal pace?
The absolute easiest thing that could be done is opening up American energy. The fact that the Biden administration closed the Keystone Pipeline, halted drilling in America from coast to coast, is just a complete negligence, frankly, of understanding how the energy market impacts our economy. And so all of these efforts that they've made that are very short-sighted, very short-term, of, unleashing the reserve and buying more barrels of Brent, none of that is real. He has to unlock and allow American energy to flourish. And so Congress plays a role here because they can push and open up through the DOE and through the appropriations process the ability to have American energy once again.
Yeah, it just seems such a rational thing, and yet it keeps getting kicked down the road with this president.
It makes no sense.
It doesn't. No, it's simple economics. Some of the greatest experiments of the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years have occurred through federalism. States' rights, states experimenting, finding ways to empower parents to change security and policing in the country. What are some of the examples you see in the states that you hope people in Washington start to adopt?
Well, I'm so encouraged because it seems like we're finally getting serious about education freedom reform. Yep. And that means we're not relying on the federal government to deal with education. We're actually encouraging and pushing that back to the states, frankly, where it belongs. So the state governments that have put universal education savings accounts on the table for the 2023 session, that's huge. Governor Stitt has committed to doing that in Oklahoma. That's going to be a big deal. In Texas, we're going to see Governor Abbott follow through on a big campaign promise he had to bring school choice to Texas. If we can get those two states done, that will have a ripple effect across the country. Because at the end of the day, John, what we want is the money to follow the student. We don't want it shackled to the federal government, to then the state government. We want to bust that up. Yep. So there's no role for the federal government to have other than very, very slim with Native American tribes and with DC. That's it. Everything else needs to be at the state level. And so I think this is a huge opportunity for governors. All those governors that are coming off of big wins from this last week, they need to just dig in deep and double down when it comes to education reform.
They got a mandate.
They got a mandate. It's clear.
Yeah.
Parents are not going away. As a parent, I've got 2 kids. I'm telling you what, there is no way we're letting off the gas on this issue at all. We want our kids well protected. When we drop them off for school, we want to know they're being taught civics, math, Latin, education, actual literary schools. We don't want this indoctrination that's coming through critical race theory.
Do we get to a point where we can make the Department of Education not have to be a cabinet agency more because we trust our states?
I think so. And I think 2024, that's actually going to be a huge signal which Republicans on the presidential ticket are running to actually abolish the Department of Education. So if the states can handle it the way that we want them to and prove that ground the next 2 years, why do we have a federal Department of Ed? We don't need it.
Yeah, such an amazing energy here with the Sentinels. Jessica, what you've created, the left had this for a decade. You have caught up very quickly for conservatives. Remarkable event here. I've just been blown away by the energy, enthusiasm, and the direction that people have. Congratulations.
Thank you, John, and thanks for being part of it. Sentinel Nation is fierce.
It is.
We're relentless optimists, and we're not going away. We know that America needs to change, and we want to be part of that.
Well, that's something I think all of our audience is nodding their heads at right now. Folks, thanks for joining us tonight. It's been an honor to have this great conversation right here in the great state of Texas with all the great Sentinels of Heritage Action for America. Have a great evening.